Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. Despite the days growing longer, mid-February can often bring the UK some of its coldest weather of the winter. Will that be the case this year? Well, as usual, I'll start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation runs from 18 GMT, Tuesday the 7th. At the outset, it's a mostly dry picture, high pressure dominating things. Just in the far northwest there are some patchy outbreaks of rain. But as I run this, look what happens in the short term. The isobars pack closely together. An active weather front moves in across the northwest of the UK, bringing heavy outbreaks of rain and snow over high ground there. But in southern and central regions, it remains mostly dry, and this weather system pulls away southeastwards, but amounts of rain in the south will be very small. Then high pressure dominates once more, but winds go into more of a south or southwesterly direction than they were at the outset. Into the early part of next week though, it's all changed. The Atlantic pushes back across all parts of the UK as high pressure declines away. It's turning more changeable or unsettled, windier conditions in all parts, and showers or longer spells of rain. But there is a big question mark over that, and I'll look at it in a little bit more detail later on. The air temperatures associated with that sequence, so it's based on the GFS, the global model run in the United States. Starting again, 18 GMT, Tuesday the 7th, greens over southern and central regions indicating close to or above a 30-year norm at about 1,500 metres above sea level, this sequence. A little bit colder there in the north. As I run this, what we see is there is some blue air for a time, so colder, but it's very brief. We see yellows and oranges pushing up from the southwest for a time as well. But towards the end, as the Atlantic moves back in, it's a very close to average picture. On these sequences, it's the dark blues which indicate the cold air. They don't really bother the UK at all through the week. What does all that mean though in terms of temperatures down at ground level? Because it has been quite cold recently, despite the air aloft being not cold. We've had anticyclonic conditions, so it's been calm, dry, clear skies at night, so temperatures have been dropping at the surface. Frosts have been quite widespread. Well, in the short term, so Wednesday the 8th of February, forecast maximums, still not particularly great for time of year, 7 or 8, quite close to the average. And the nights remain chilly. This is showing forecast minimums Thursday the 9th, close to or just a little bit below freezing, quite widely, so frost in many parts of the country. Going forwards to Friday, looking at maximums once more, not much has changed, at least not much across most of England and Wales, but in Northern Ireland there, Scotland, it is now milder. We're into double figures, 10 Celsius above the average for this time of year. And going forwards to Saturday the 11th, the higher values are spread right across the UK. We're seeing 12s in central and eastern counties, so it's mild into the weekend. And the nighttime temperatures, well, they're still quite chilly because high pressures continuing to dominate things, but they're generally a little bit higher than they were to start off with. So instead of 1 or 2 degrees below zero, we're now 2 or 3 or 4 above it. The risk of frost is reducing through the first week. It's going to become patchier and maybe ground frost in places, but it looks as though air temperatures, which initially were dipping below freezing point, will be staying a couple of degrees at least above it in most places. The afternoon temperatures into the early part of next week as it's turning more unsettled. It's still mild, double figures quite widely. So it looks like Valentine's Day this year will be characterised by close to or above average temperatures, no sign of snow, at least if this model run is correct. The UK Met Office MOGREPS-G temperature plot for London really backs up that message. Through the first few days, there's a gentle upwards trend, so maximums of maybe 6-7 degrees to start off with according to this. But then by the 10th of February, we're seeing double figures through the days, of course, but also the nighttime values are rising as well. There's the 0 Celsius line, so the first couple of days, frost quite quite likely. Most of the runs, in fact, all of the runs dipping below 0. But then the minimums are trending upwards too. The frost risk is reducing, as I mentioned. The strong winds, though, are a key feature of the weather in the short term, at least in the north. This is the Mogreb's G wind gust forecast for Inverness, the 8th of February, so just a second day of a forecast period. Maximums of around 60 miles an hour being shown here. Good agreement between the different runs in the ensemble because it is a relatively short lead time. Of course, it's as you go forwards that you'll see the runs veering off in different directions and showing different possible solutions. That's when forecast confidence, of course, decreases. Also, just worth mentioning that this is from Inverness, but if you go to further west and further north, the gust speed forecasts are higher, 70 miles an hour or maybe a little bit more, and that's shown on this chart from the UKV model. So 14 GMT Wednesday, the 8th of February, the red and purple shading there is where the strongest winds are, and gusts there approaching 80 miles per hour in the Western Isles, so far northwest of the United Kingdom. But generally windy in the north, winds decreasing as you head further south. So just 19, 20 miles an hour in the London area, nothing to be concerned about down here. Although later on through the day, winds will be tending to pick up further in central and eastern Britain, but not anywhere to the same extent as in the north. Rainfall. These charts from the ECM and GFS models show forecast accumulations in millimetres for days 0 to 5. No measurable rain in much of the UK, only northern and western Scotland where the amounts are significant. That's shown by the blue and the green shading. Moving forwards to the 0 to 10-day period, values have now increased everywhere, but they still remain quite low in much of central and eastern Britain. The wettest conditions in the north and the west. So, towards the end of week 1, do the deterministic models agree with each other, or have they all gone off in different directions? Here is the GFS, which the animation was based upon, this chart for Valentine's Day. The transition to more changeable or unsettled weather is starting to take place. Low pressures from the Atlantic moving eastwards and high pressure declining. Tightly packed isobars here indicating strong winds, particularly in the north and the west. That's where the greatest risk of rain is at this particular time, but generally a change back to an Atlantic flow starting to shape up. The Canadian model at the same time, everything's a little bit further west here. The areas of low pressure further away in the Atlantic, high pressure still keeping things mostly settled over large parts of the UK. So if this one's correct, the dry conditions probably lasting longer. The German icon model, this has the changeable theme pushing across the north and the west, high pressure declining, although perhaps a little bit less vicious looking than the GFS chart, with areas of low pressure not quite as deep and a little bit further away from the UK. The European ECM run, high pressure there to the south, and over continental Europe, the changeable conditions mainly in the north and the west of the UK. And finally, the UK Met Office Global. This has high pressure being more dominant, the Atlantic being held at bay at this point. Taken all together, there are significant differences there in the details. The general picture is quite similar between them, but in terms of the UK's weather, very, very significant how they vary. To summarise, the greatest chance of rain, though, would certainly seem to be in the north and the west. That's where the most changeable weather is likely to be focused. Also, the strongest winds. The uncertainty is whether or not that changeable pattern pushes right down across all parts of the country or not. Probably not at this point is the answer. How is week 2 shaping up? As ever, it's all about trends and probabilities at this range. So focusing on the ensemble data, and I'll start with the 16-day GEFS plot for London. Air mass temperatures, the top half, the signal very, very clear this week. The thick purple line, the ensemble mean, staying above the thick black line, the 30-year average. Only a few runs dipping briefly below it. Air temperatures at 1,500 metres above sea level, mild throughout. The risk of rain continues. There are a number of spikes throughout the second week, but not very many, and they are not very big. Therefore, changeable pattern perhaps. Weather fronts moving down from the northwest, weakening, just bringing small amounts of rain on some days to southern counties. A lot of dry weather, though, would be likely. 2-metre temperatures using the GEFS data table. Light greens throughout the second week appear in large quantities. Also the yellows, which are runs going for between 11 and 15 Celsius. Temperatures probably summarised as close to or above the average throughout this period. On some days, it could start to feel quite warm. A lot, of course, will depend on the strength of the winds, the amount of cloud, and whether there's any rain around, but certainly a spring-like flavour may be in the offing at times. Up to Manchester, the air temperature profile is similar to the London one, the positive anomaly perhaps a little bit smaller. And in terms of the amount of rain, spikes continue to appear through the second week, and there are more of them on this chart than there were on the London one. So a greater risk of rain, but with that said, it doesn't appear to be a washout by any means. 2-metre temperatures for the Manchester area, light greens dominating, and there is some yellow, but less than was on the London plot. But given that we're a little bit further north here, temperatures would generally be expected to be a fraction lower. So close to or slightly above the average, probably when taken through the week as a whole. Up to Glasgow, the air temperature profile is a bit different this time. It's closer to the 30-year norm, well, at least the ensemble mean is, and that's because there's a lot more fluctuation. More runs are dipping below that thick black line, but they're not staying there. It's pointing towards a changeable picture, maybe some colder air briefly moving across this part of the UK, but it certainly doesn't look like it's going to be establishing itself. The amount of rain spikes shown on the bottom part of the plot there is significantly greater than it was on the Manchester and London ones, and there are some relatively big ones there. It's quite a wet picture here at least. 2-metre temperatures, light greens dominating throughout the 6 to 10 Celsius runs, but there is a significant amount of dark green. Those are runs going for between 1 and 5 Celsius. As I've hinted there, with colder pockets of air briefly moving across the north of the UK, there is the likelihood, at least, that some days it could be quite chilly, but over the period as a whole, very close to the average. The GEFS 10-day mean surface level pressure plot, so for Friday, the 17th of February, indicates that high pressure is likely to be centred to the south of the UK, an Atlantic influence, therefore, more likely in the north. It really fits in with what I've been discussing. The ECM plot, the comparable one from the European model, very, very similar. High pressure maybe a little bit further south on this one. The changeable or unsettled Atlantic flow perhaps sinking down across parts of central Britain as well as the north. So a greater risk of rain here, if it's correct, maybe. The GEFS data table showing mean surface level pressure forecasts, so from all the individual runs within the ensemble throughout the 2-week time period. London on the left, Edinburgh on the right, yellows and oranges and reds mostly, or if not all, are runs which are forecasting pressure to be above the average. There are a few in the yellow which go slightly below it. But the key point here is that there is more orange on the London chart than there is on the Edinburgh one, although even there's quite a significant amount of it. But it's taking them together, what they suggest is that the high pressure will be centred to the south of the United Kingdom. That really fits in with the ensemble mean plots which I've just shown. So southern and central regions is where it is likely to be staying the driest through this second week. Postage stamp plots just reinforcing the message. Each of these shows the forecast pressure patterns from one of the runs in the GEFS on a Valentine's Day. Rain, a greater risk of it in the north and the west. Dry conditions, a greater chance in the south and the east. Sudden Stratospheric Warming Watch is an SSW on the way. I've been providing weekly updates on this. Remember that an SSW can increase the chance of cold weather in the UK, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after it happens. Is one on the way? Well, this is an interesting chart from the GEFS model. It shows zonal winds in the stratosphere at 60 degrees north. It averages them out right around the globe. And the point to note here is that from about the 15th of February, quite a few of the runs actually go for a reversal of zonal winds. So instead of westerly, they go in easterly. That's indicated by this negative component. That would point towards a major SSW taking place. Perhaps there's a chance between the 15th and the 20th of February. It's not a given because some of the runs don't show that reversal. In fact, quite a lot of them don't, but there is a chance. It's higher than I think at any point so far this winter. Temperatures, there is some warming appearing there through that period. So, is an SSW imminent? Well, a major SSW may happen in mid-February. I think in terms of the probability, based on that GEFS data, around 30 to 40% chance, although I would add that it has been increasing in recent days. That is certainly something to keep a watch out for. It may lead to a cold snap developing through the first half of March. Conversely, though, if the pressure blocks fall in a different way, we could end up with an early taste of spring. What the SSWs tend to do if they do propagate down to lower levels is increase the chance of blocking areas of high pressure, having an impact on the UK's weather. Just where those set up means we could either end up with cold north or easterly winds, but alternatively, the winds could end up in a very mild or even quite warm south or southwesterly direction. So, to summarise the next 2 weeks. Week 1, it's looking mostly dry in the south, changeable though in the north, and very windy for a time early on. The risk of rain increases later, especially in the north and the west. There's quite a lot of uncertainty about how far south and eastwards that will extend, but most of the computer models are saying that amounts of rain in the south or southeast will be very small through the first week. Temperatures trend upwards and the risk of frost reduces. Week 2, wettest in the northwest, driest in the southeast. Daytime temperatures generally close to or above the average. There could even be some early spring warmth on offer. But as I highlighted, a lot will depend on the amount of cloud, rain and wind. Patchy night frost is still possible despite the above average daytime temperatures. The chance of it is probably highest in the south and the east because those are the parts of the UK which will be closest to high pressure. So, there we have it. I started off by asking the question, will mid-February bring the UK some of its coldest weather of the winter this year? The answer is, according to the current data, almost certainly not. Although never say never, things can change quickly, but it does look extremely unlikely. Certainly, there isn't anything in the offing like the big freeze of February 1991, which I remember very clearly. It was at this time of the year, and it happened to coincide with my 21st birthday. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then as ever, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thank you for watching now. Bye.